considered what? Your peripheral nervous system. Okay? All right, we have these glia cells, which are basically accessory cells. They're the helper cells behind the scenes. Some of them make myelin. What's one of the ones that make myelin called? We have swan cells, and the one, come on, someone be brave. What is it called? Oh, not even close. Get out of here. Oligodendrocytes. Those are the two ones that are making the actual myelin. What is myelin made out of? We'll start with that. It's made out of fat, so it's an insulation for the actual nerves. Then we have different ones. We have epididymal that makes cerebral spinal fluid. Ones that do phagocytosis called the microglia. And then the astrocytes, which form that blood-brain barrier. Remember, it is not a physical barrier. It's actually cells, which we're going to come to now. That what do these cells do? They surround what? They surround what part of the brain? What parts in the brain do they surround? The actual capillaries. They surround the actual capillaries in the brain, because the capillaries is where stuff gets to and from, back and forth. So these astrocytes surround the capillaries, and they say, you can come in, nope, you need to stay in there. You're not coming in the brain. So they allow things in or out of the actual brain. All right, so we said, we have different types of neurons, ones that sense and one that actually give action. Which ones are the actually ones that say, hey, that's hot? What are those called? No, what's the fancy word? Afferent. So afferent detect something to say, is it hot, is it cold, is it painful, whatever. The one that say, dummy, move your hand, those are the efferent. Very good. All right, the parts of just a generic neuron in general. The part that receives the signal is called the what? It's called the dendrite. Then we have the cell body, which is in the middle. The part that sends the signal away with an A is called the axon. A for away, axon. And then we already talked about the myelin that surrounds them for the insulation of the actual neuron, and that's on the actual axon. And the little gaps in between are called the nodes or near. All right, what does myelin do to the impulse, to the actual nerve signal? What does it do? It makes it faster, makes it go there quicker. So if I don't have myelin, will the signal still get there? Absolutely, but it'll be slower. It'll take much more time to get there. What's the condition to where they have lack of myelin on their actual neurons? What is that medical condition called? MS, multiple sclerosis. They have lack of myelin on their actual neurons, so they're much slower at processing things. All right, so then we looked at the very complex that the book tried to make it process of the signal traveling, actual electricity traveling down the actual neuron. So first of all, electricity involves the use of what's found in Gatorade? Electrolytes. What are the two electrolytes responsible for the actual conduction of electricity? Sodium and potassium. Okay, so when we start, before we actually flip the switch and make the signal go, where's all the sodium at? Outside. So therefore potassium's on the inside. And then in order for the signal to go, what happens to them? Switch places. So the signal travels along, and then once they're switched, can a new signal be sent? Nope, they need to go back to their original position. They have fancy names for them. We're not going to worry about those crazy fancy names, okay? All right, the space between an axon and a dendrite, the little space where we have those neurotransmitters floating around, what's that space called?
Synapse.
That's called a synapse. And we have the little neurotransmitters floating from one to the other, actually sending the signal back and forth on there. So it goes from one and it attaches to what we call a receptor. That's going to be important, guys, when we get to pharmacology, because certain drugs will block them from coming out. Some of them will block the actual receptor that they attach to. Picture the lock and key. So the key is the neurotransmitter. The lock is the actual receptor that it attaches to. The two never connect. We can never start the car. It'll never happen. Okay? Dropping stuff here. Now we have the spinal cord. Okay, so the spinal cord, we said it goes all the way down, but it stops at a certain part and forms what's called caudate equine. At what point does it form that caudate equine where it splits off? Between which one and which one? Between L1 and L2. So therefore, if I'm going to stab someone in the back with a big giant needle, where am I going to do it? Between L3 and L4. Below that. Remember, caudate equine means translated to horsetail. That's what it translates into. So that's where it kind of flares off, kind of like a horsetail. So you're not going to nick the spinal column if you're below that point, between L3 and L4. The process that if someone has a stroke on the left side of the brain, what side of their body is going to be paralyzed or weak?
Right.
On the right side. So it's always going to be backwards, right? What's the process of it switching back and forth like that called? It's called decussation, where it actually switches back and forth. It actually goes one opposite directions and does that in the actual spinal cord right there, on the actual, what is that called? Jeez. The brainstem, I'm sorry, that's where it does. It switches places, decussation. All right, we have the different spinal nerves, very similar numbers. Instead of 7 now, we have what for cervical? We have 8, so it still stays same. So now it's 8 instead of 7. We have 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and then we have 5 sacral. And how many coccyx ones?
1.
1 coccyx one. These are the nerves that come off of the actual spinal cord. If someone's having sciatic pain, which nerve plexus is being affected by that? The sacral. If someone can't breathe, which actual nerve plexus might be affected? Nope. The cervical plexus. That's the cervical plexus. We'll just leave that there. Okay. All right, next step. So we're going to look at someone comes up and stabs you in the back. Doggone those dirty dogs, right? If they stab you in your thoracic region of your spine, what is the end result going to be? You're going to be a paraplegic, the entire thoracic spine from T1 all the way down to L1, so the entire thoracic spine. If they stab you exactly at C5, what's the end result going to be? Quadriplegic. Anywhere above that, what's the end result? You dead. There you go. You're no longer breathing, or at least, at the very least, you're going to be on a ventilator at that time. Does a reflex go to the brain? Nope. How does it happen? It goes directly to the spinal cord and right back. It's a loop that eventually your brain figures it out, but it does not go to the brain. All right, we have something called the Meninges. The Meninges' job is to hold in what substance that surrounds the brain and spinal cord? Cerebral spinal fluid, right? The stuff that coats the brain and coats the spinal cord. It has 3 layers. The very durable outer layer is called the what? Hence, we call it the durable layer, the dura. The one that looks like a spider web, which is the middle layer, is called the arachnoid. Well, it's got a spider name, right? Arachnoid. And then the pia is the very bottom layer. It's very thin. Okay, if I have inflammation of my meninges, I have meningitis. Good. What's a ventricle?
Hollow section of the brain.
Yep, it's the hollow sections in the brain where we find miscellaneous things. What's made in the ventricles that we just talked about? Cerebral spinal fluid is made in the actual ventricles of the brain. That's cerebral spinal fluid. Remember, it circulates. It's not just staying in one place. It's constantly circulating around the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, what color is cerebral spinal fluid?
Clear.
Clear. Okay, good. If I have excessive cerebral spinal fluid in my brain, I have what condition? Hydrocephalus. Hydro for water, cephalus for cephalo for brain. So water on the brain. Good. What are the 3 sections of the brainstem? Right. Midbrain, pons, and then our favorite of all, medulla oblongata. Which one is the most important out of the 3? The medulla oblongata. When in doubt, medulla oblongata. So it's the cardiac, respiratory, all the very important stuff is found in there. Okay, so we looked at, we'll talk more about that in the next chapter. We talked about briefly in this chapter and also in the endocrine tract that we have the pineal gland that secretes a substance called, what's the hormone that the pineal gland secretes? Starts with an M, you can buy it at the Walmart. Melatonin, and it activates this system. What's the system called that actually turns off your brain and allows you to go to sleep? It's called the what? It's called the reticular activation system. Yeah, you guys got to study that. There you go. So reticular activation system is actually stimulated by that. That's the turn-off switch for your brain. Okay, now let's look at the different lobes of the brain, the nitty-gritty, right? So this lobe is responsible for my ability to feel things such as pain, pressure, temperature, all those kind of things. Which lobe is responsible for senses? Parietal. She's doing it back there. Parietal lobe. Which lobe is, let's say, someone's in a car accident, and all of a sudden, someone that never cussed a day in their life is making you blush like a sailor, and they're acting inappropriately. Where do they have damage, possibly? Frontal lobe, decision making, reasoning, all the things that's probably not a good idea. Well, if their frontal lobe isn't developed, or if it's broken, they will not be able to have conscious decision making abilities. They're going to be very impulsive in their decisions. Okay, which lobe is responsible for sight, for vision? Picture the eyeballs. Where do they go? Straight back to the occipital lobe. Which one's for hearing? It's right by the ears. Temporal lobe. Very, very good. If I were to say someone said all of a sudden they smell flowers, and all of a sudden they become very weepy and emotional. He said, "Oh, my grandmother, I remember now. She had these flowers at her house, and I just remember her. She used to do all these wonderful things for me, or she beat me with a spoon," whatever the case may be, right? Which part of the brain would be responsible for this emotional response that they're connecting the dots between those two things? Nope. The whole system, what is it called? So the hippocampus is involved, but it's the entire limbic system. So the hippocampus does what? It stores the memories. So it turns short-term memories into long-term memories. Think an elephant never forgets. Well, it's not an elephant, it's a hippo this time, right? So that's storing the memories. It's the amygdala that connects the memories to the emotions, okay? So the whole system all together is working together, and it connects senses with emotions and memories, okay? All right, fun time. Someone has increased pressure in their brain. Let's say they were in a car accident, whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I can't move my eyes. My eyes can't move anymore. Which cranial nerve has been affected possibly by their inability to move their eyes? Nope, to move their eyes. Three. So oculomotor is the third cranial nerve. If they lose the ability, says, I can't smell anything, I can't smell a damn thing. Which cranial nerve would that be? Cranial nerve number 1. Olfactory, for the sense of smell. If they can't see, all of a sudden, cranial nerve number 2. If they lose the ability to shrug their shoulders, which cranial nerve would that be? Number 11. That's the accessory one. I'm giving you the big ones right here. If they can't feel, where are we at here? If they can't feel their face, and they lose the ability to smile, which one would that be? And you might say 5 or 7. It would be number 5 would be the primary one for the most of the movement of the face. Number 5. Good. Okay. Make sure you know. What's the acronym? On Old Olympus. What do we got? Towering tops. Yes. Yeah, good job. On Old Olympus, towering tops, a friendly Viking grows vines and hops. Okay? And if that picture helps you, well, I hope it does. There we go. Now the good stuff, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system happens because you tell it to, or does it happen automatically? Hence, automatic. Autonomic, automatically. A bear comes out of the woods and starts chasing me down. Which nervous system is activated in the autonomic nervous system? Sympathetic. And what's the other name for the sympathetic nervous system? The adrenergic. Think adrenaline. Adrenergic, sympathetic nervous system. What happens to my pupils when the bear's chasing me? Dilate. What happens to the secretions in my nose and my mouth? Dry up. What happens to my heart rate? Increased heart rate. Blood pressure? Increase. My lungs? They dilate because you need more air to run from that bear, right? Is it a good time to go to the bathroom when a bear is chasing you? No. So it decreases urination, decreases bowel movement. There, we'll just put it that way. Decreases bowel movement. And does it make you dry, or does it make you sweat if you're getting chased by a bear? Make you sweat. There you go. So that is the sympathetic or adrenergic nervous system, fight or flight. The opposite is called what? Parasympathetic. And we call it the rest and digest. Okay? So in the rest and digest system, now it's time to chill. So what happens to your pupils? Constrict. All the opposite, right guys? So blood pressure, pulse, down. Secretions increases. Your skin then is dry at that time. Well, that's dry. Can you go to the bathroom?
Yes.
Absolutely. All the things that are the opposite of the sympathetic. And remember the crazy acronym, the crazy thing I told you to remember the sympathetic. It says you can't pee, can't see, can't spit, can't shit. Can't pee, can't see, can't spit, can't shit. All those things are the sympathetic nervous system. That will never, ever, ever go away, and you know I'm not lying. Okay. And I think that was the nervous system broken down for you. All right. Next. All right, senses. Okay, so we'll start off with different types of receptors that are found throughout the body related to these sensory organs. So the sensor that picks up stress, pressure, or stretch of an organ or a body part is which receptor? Which one is that? So pressure or stretch. It's called a mechanoreceptor. This one picks up chemicals, well duh, such as odor, taste, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Which one is that? Chemo, it's in the name, right? That's easy. Well, temperature, duh, that would be the thermoreceptor. Pain receptor, another name for a pain receptor is, I know I say it wrong, so I say nociceptor, but it's nociceptor, is that actually how it's spelled on here. So the nociceptor is for pain. The one that detects light, photoreceptor. The one that tells you where your body parts are located in relation to each other. It's called a proprioreceptor. Proprioreceptor, relation of body parts to each other. Okay. All right. What is it called when, if I'm having a heart attack, not just my heart hurts, but also my left arm hurts as well? Well, my left arm's not damaged. What is that called? That's called referred pain. We'll talk a lot more about pain, trust me, down the road. I have a whole chapter on it. So it's different spots of the body where you're going to experience pain, but it's not actually the injured spot. Okay? What does pain tell us, just in general, guys? What is it telling the brain? Saying that there is damage somewhere. In general, it tells you that there's damage. So not always, but usually it tells us that there's damage. But we'll get more on that. All right, we'll start with the sense of taste. First of all, the sense of taste, the act of tasting is called what? Starts with a G. Gustation. Okay? Understand, who has more taste buds, an elderly person or a child? A child. So don't pick on that kid if they don't want to eat their Brussels sprouts, right? You guys laying off your kids after I said that? Maybe not. You don't have to. All right. So they have more taste buds, so they're going to taste more than the older person is going to taste, things that you may not know that are there. We have the different tastes. We have sweet. What else? Salty, bitter, savory. What's savory called? Umami. So we have salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami, which is savory. We said it comes from, you buy in a shaker bottle, what's that stuff called again? Accent, which is MSG, glutamate. That's what's found in there. Okay. Now, sense of smell is called what? What do we call that? It's called olfaction, which will help you with that olfactory nerve, right? The sense of smell. So we say that whatever you're smelling, the molecule enters your nose and it attaches to what? That's dangling down in the back. It's called the cilia, and on the cilia we have the chemoreceptors. They're going to pick up and detect what it is that we're actually smelling. Sometimes we don't want it there, right? But sometimes they stick around longer than we want them to. Now, hearing is the next section. So we have three sections of the ear. On the outer ear we have what's called the auricle, or the pinna is another name for it, then the auditory canal, which is basically your ear canal right there. And then that stops at what point? What's the end point of the outer ear? The next section, that's another name for it, is called the eardrum. What's that thing called? Called the tympanic membrane. So the outer ear is the auricle and the auditory canal. Now the middle ear starts at the tympanic membrane, and then we have little bones in there called ossicles. Okay? Those bones, we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. What is their job to do? It's to transmit what? Vibrations. We call that conductive, or conduction, okay? So we're going to let's talk for a second about hearing loss. If a person has damage to the nerve that goes to the brain, is that conductive or neurological hearing loss? Neurological. If there's a problem, let's say they got wax in their ear, they have a broken bone, or we have problems with the cochlea and actually transmitting the signal, then we have what type of hearing loss? Conductive hearing loss. So the conduction is actually stopped. So the actual vibrations go from the eardrum to the tympanic membrane, along the bones, around the cochlea, and let's get to that. I'll switch over here. So in the cochlea, we also have little, and I had them drawn over there, we have little hairs also in the actual cochlea. They vibrate. What happens if I listen to loud music way too long? They break off, and I lose the ability to hear high frequency or low frequency sound. High frequency sound. There you go. Now we have two other things connected to that cochlea. The cochlea is the snail-shaped thing, the actual organ that picks up the hearing, the very last step in the process. Okay? We have two other structures that are involved in actual balance. They help keep you balanced from falling over. What are they called? We have the semicircular canals, and what's the other one? The vestibule. Those are the two organs that are involved in balance. It's all about the fluid inside of them, whether it shifts this way or that. It tells the brain, am I upright, am I sideways, what is the case? So they're semicircular canals, vestibule are for balance. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the eye. Okay, what is the white part of the eye called? What do you call the white part of the eye? It's called the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is the white of the eye. The iris, is it a structure or is it a hole? It's a hole. Everyone got that now? So it's a hole that the light enters into. Behind the actual, move on here. Behind the actual iris, so the iris, first of all, what is the iris? It's made out of what? Because it can actually move. What is it called? What is it made out of? It's a muscle, right? It's a sphincter muscle that can dilate, open up, or it can close, it can constrict. Okay, so it's an actual muscle right there. Behind the actual iris, behind that hole, is what structure that actually focuses the light? What's that called? It's called the lens, right? Is the lens solid or is it flexible? It's flexible, so it's able to shrink and stretch out as need be. Now the light enters through that lens and it then focuses on the very back of the retina, okay? First of all, what's that process of focusing on the back of the retina called? That's called what? The bending of the light back to the, that's called refraction, okay? And I already answered the next question I'm going to say. And where does it focus on? It focuses on the retina on the back, okay? So let's go on here. So we see on the retina, I'll have to go back here. I'm jumping ahead of myself. On the retina, we have things that detect color and things that detect black and white. Okay, what are they called? So we have rods and we have cones, okay? The rods, we said, detect black and white, and therefore the cones detect color. Which one needs bright light in order to work? Rods or cones? Cones. Can you see color in dark? No, absolutely not. When the image is focused on those rods and cones on the back of the retina, how does it look? Is it upside down or is it straight up? It's upside down. Very good. And now let me backtrack because I skipped some stuff now. What is it called when we have excess fluid that builds up in the eyeball? What is that called? What disease am I referring to when we have too much fluid? It's called glaucoma. What's the fluid called? It's got a crazy name, doesn't it? It's called aqueous humor. Aqueous humor, which sounds like liquid, right? Aqueous humor builds up in the front part, the anterior portion of the eye, and that end result is called glaucoma. Can glaucoma lead to blindness?
Yes.
Absolutely. If untreated, it can lead to blindness. There you go. All right, let's look at these other terminologies. So we already talked the bending of the light. Once again, was called refraction. What is it called when the actual lens changes shape in order to adjust to things near and far away? What is that called? That I said no nurse is going to know what that is. Accommodation. Make sure you go home and ask whoever it is you know that's a nurse. Say, what's accommodation? They'll have no idea. So it's the actual bending of the lens. Now you guys know in order to adjust to something near or far. But what nurses check is when you bring an object close, we call it accommodation, but it's not. The eyes go crossed. What is that called? So I bring a pen close and their eyes will go crossed. That's called convergence. Going cross-eyed is called convergence. So accommodation is bending of the lens. Convergence is the crossing of the eyes as something gets closer. Okay. What does ultraviolet light do to the lens over time? Too much sunlight, what's going to happen to your eyes? You're going to end up with cataracts. It's going to cloud the eyeball, so protect those eyes. How many lenses do you get a lifetime?
One.
One. Does not regenerate itself. Okay, last chapter. All right. First of all, endocrine system secretes what substance? Hormones. That's a starting point, right? So we're secreting hormones in the body. Where is the endocrine system found? In the chest, in the head, in the groin, where?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. They're scattered throughout the body. We have several different glands scattered throughout the body. Which is faster, endocrine or nervous system? Which is faster? Nervous system. All right, which one sticks around longer, nervous system or endocrine? Endocrine. Very good. All right, moving on. Let's see here. So we're going to start off with, we say what's called the master gland, but actually is not. The hypothalamus is called the master gland, but it actually is not. Because remember, it doesn't actually directly act on anything except for one hormone, which is called growth hormone. Very good. So the growth hormone is the only one that actually acts on things. So growth hormone does what? It's real simple. It makes your bones and muscles increase in size. Very good. All right, now let's move on to the true master gland. We all know the truth now, and which is what gland are we talking about? The pituitary. So I'm gonna give you. We're gonna play a little Jeopardy. I'm gonna give you a definition. You tell me which hormone I'm referring to. This hormone causes contraction of the uterus. Oxytocin. Good. This hormone produces milk. Prolactin. Good. This hormone causes ovulation itself. Luteinizing hormone. So this hormone then causes maturing of the egg. Follicle stimulating hormone. Because what's a follicle? It is where the egg matures, right? It's the actual case that the actual egg matures in. So the follicle stimulating hormone causes the actual egg to mature. Good. And then we already talked about growth hormone. So let's move on here. Let's see here. All right. This hormone we already mentioned before is secreted by the pineal gland. What is it? Melatonin. What does it do? It activates what? Sleep, or the reticular activation system, which turns on sleep, right? This hormone, they're called T3 and T4. How about that? What do? They cause an increase in what? Metabolism. And now when you picture metabolism, what are you going to picture? You're going to picture a fire, right? Because when my metabolism is too fast, I'm really hot and I'm going burning through a lot of fuel, right? There you go. So it's the T3 and T4. This hormone is responsible for development of your immune system. Thymosin. From the what gland? Thymus gland. What's unique about the thymus gland? So when you're a child, it's really big and then it shrinks as you're an adult, because when does your immune system develop? When you're a child. Very good. Unless you keep your kid in a bubble, right? Don't do that. All right. This hormone, when your blood calcium levels are too high, it takes it from the blood and puts it into the bone. Which hormone is that? I just literally gave you the name. It takes the calcium and puts it in the blood. Into the bone. So calcitonin takes it from the blood, puts it into the bone. So the opposite hormone that takes it from the bone and puts it back into the blood is called parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid, it's called parathyroid because where is it located? Behind the actual thyroid gland itself. It's actually attached to it. Good. All right, let's look at, we have a gland that sits on top of the kidneys. What's that one called right there? It's called your adrenal gland, and therefore it's got what a name. Adrenal sounds a lot like what? Adrenaline, so you're going to think it secretes what substance? Adrenaline, aka epinephrine. Good. Which we know now is a neurotransmitter and a hormone in this circumstance right here. It also secretes what other substance that we says decreases immune system and decreases inflammation and throughout the body? Steroids. Right, good. And now we have the pancreas. We know the pancreas in the endocrine system secretes two things. It secretes insulin and what else? Glucagon. Which one's released by the beta cells? Insulin. Insulin does what to blood sugar? Insulin makes it go down. Please don't forget that. That's never going to go away. Insulin makes the sugar go down because it takes the sugar from where, and then it takes it where?
From the blood and uses it everywhere else.
Yep, takes it from the blood and takes it to the cells, and then the cells will absorb it at that time. So it transports sugar once again from the blood to the cell. So it makes blood sugar go down. So glucagon turns what into what? Glycogen into glucose. Good. So it takes the stored form of sugar as glycogen, turns it into the usable form of sugar, glucose. And where's that glycogen? Where's the glycogen stored at? What part of the body? Liver in the muscles. That's where it's stored at. And what cells make glucagon? We already said beta cells make insulin, so alpha cells in the pancreas. Good. Who has testosterone, men or women? Both. Where do women get their testosterone? From the adrenal gland. Men get it from the adrenal gland and from the testes as well. So if I were to say this is the this is the pregnancy hormone. I guess I can say it that way. The hormone of pregnancy, progesterone. We'll just leave it at that. This hormone is for female development, female sex characteristics. Estrogen. And then obviously testosterone is for male sexual characteristics. Good. Ta-da.